good.
The problem was that, sorry, the problem was at my end.
Ah, all right. Well, I'm
So I
happy to
think
hear
we're-
that.
Yeah, no, and I can hear it too, and I'm happy to hear it. So I think we're just waiting for the mayor and the chief to join.
What about Robert? Is Robert there too?
I don't see him yet. I'm using a different computer and I'm not quite familiar with it, so we'll have to bear with us all because,
Okay.
oh, I see there's an arrow. Maybe that indicates who else is here.
But
Yes,
everyone
I
can-
see.
Everyone
Okay.
can hear me though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I see that Joan and David and the chief have joined us. There, I see the chief. He seems to be on the move.
Keeps walking.
Yes.
I was getting some IT support.
Hi, Chief.
I
How you doing,
didn't
folks?
realize that I was only seeing part of the screen. So the mayor has joined us, I see. Is that right, Mayor?
Not yet.
I see his name on the screen. Okay.
So I'm just waiting for Robert Sweda to join and then we'll get going.
Okay. Did you get a confirmation from Robert Sweda?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. I think, Krista, if you're set to go, we'll get started. We have a quorum. Are you good, Krista?
Yes, just let me get the agenda.
Oh, $9 million. Whoa.
Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order for the 27th of April, 2020. And I thought we would begin our meeting with a moment of silence to commemorate the victims of the mass shooting in Nova Scotia between April 18th and 19th. This senseless violence caused a deep ripple that has been felt throughout our country during an already fragile time. I know members of the Ottawa Police Service organized a very touching tribute. Let us continue to come together in these challenging times to support one another.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to start the meeting now. And I just wanted to start off, as everybody knows, and I've been a prime example of it, we're doing this on Zoom and live streaming at the same time on YouTube. Given this meeting is being held electronically, I want to caution that there is a possibility of technical difficulties. Should we receive any disruptions, I would ask that everyone remain patient as we work to fix the issue and resume the meeting as soon as possible. Now, I was going to introduce Robert Sweda at this time, but I have not heard that he's joined us yet, so I'll put that off until
He's
such
joined.
time.
He's joined.
Has
I'm
joined.
here, Sandy. Yes.
Okay, great. So this is our first meeting with you, Robert, and it's our first monthly board meeting since February. So I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly acknowledge our newest board member, Robert Sweda. Robert was sworn in privately in March so he could begin assuming his duties as a board member. He was appointed by the province and will be serving a 3-year term. Robert, on behalf of the board, welcome, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with all of you and fulfilling my duties.
Thanks.
Welcome, Robert.
Thank you.
I'd also like to welcome Joan McKenna, who is acting deputy chief until July 1st. The position will then rotate to Superintendent Mark Ford for the following 3 months. Thank you, Joan and Mark, for your ongoing leadership.
Thank you, Chair Smallwood.
On this evening's agenda, we will be receiving a presentation from the OPS on their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the work of the leadership team of the service, as well as the contributions of all OPS members to this public health crisis. I think all of us perhaps have slowly come to grips with the magnitude of the challenge that we face. This is certainly the biggest event in our lifetimes. And I think what is particularly of note here is that it is not only an economic crisis, and it certainly is an economic crisis that we haven't seen probably since the 1930s, but it's also a huge social crisis. We as humans like to hold and touch, and especially with our elders, it's so important. So having these two things come together is so challenging for everyone. And so I think as a police service, this is what where the police service really shines in moments like this, where to serve when all of us are in a period of challenge, our members are showing up for work every day, and our leadership team is leading them. And of course, we know about all of the other first responders and how important what they're doing is. But I think in particular, it's worth noting some of the contributions of our frontline members. I know there was one of our members who was rescuing an unconscious woman by a roof. I think he was known on Twitter as Spider-Man, but he's Acting Sergeant Jason Riopel, and his actions were certainly, I think, great to see for the public, somebody who raced to help and save somebody. There's also the actions of other who have solved break and enters in their neighborhoods. I know my daughter and I saw 2 officers intervening where there was a visibly apparently intoxicated individual on Rideau Street who was staggering around, and the 2 officers, without hesitating, reached out to restrain him with no concern for their own personal safety, and obviously by extension their families, restrained him to ensure that he didn't receive harm by staggering into the oncoming traffic. All of this and the members who are reaching out to our most vulnerable people so that they know help is available and can access the supports they need. And I'm sure we will be hearing more about this at the meeting. So Chief, I just wanted to say, I think I speak on behalf of all of the board when I say how much we appreciate the work of your team, your team, and all of the members, both civilian and sworn, of the police service.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Board.
Before we confirm the agenda, I want to note 2 important reports that were supposed to come forward, but will be delayed. The Equitable Work Environment Policy Report, as well as the Human Rights and Racial Profiling Policy Annual Report. These are extremely important reports for the board as they fit within our strategic priorities. I understand staff have been placing their focus on the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Plan, or EDI, that was approved by the board in February. Therefore, these additional reports will come forward in May. Finally, in terms of meeting decorum, as each item is presented, I will ask board members if the item is carried. I will then confirm by asking if there are any dissents. For the presentation, I would ask everyone to be muted other than the speaker. If you are joining without video, please say your name before speaking. If you're joining the meeting from a location with background noise, please keep yourself muted until it is time for you to speak. Following the public meeting, we will have our in-camera meeting by teleconference. I will now proceed with the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is the confirmation of agenda that the Ottawa Police Services Board confirm the agenda of the 27th of April 2020 meeting. Is the agenda confirmed?
Confirmed.
Are there any dissents? Hearing none, I'll go on to the next item, which is the confirmation of minutes. Minutes number 18 of the 24th of February 2020 and minutes 20 of the 16th of April 2020. That the Ottawa Police Services Board confirm minutes 18 of the 24th February 2020 meeting and minutes number 20 of the 16th of April meeting 2020. Are the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Are
Confirmed.
there any dissents? Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
None.
Committee meetings, reports from committee chairs and minutes. The Policy and Governance Committee meetings, number 5 of the 2nd of March 2020. Member Valiquet, as chair of this committee, I would ask you to please provide a brief update.
Will do. Thank you, Monsieur le Président. The Policy and Governance Committee met last March 2nd. We received a presentation pertaining to item number 8 on this evening's agenda, and that is measures to curb gun violence. We also discussed the use of technology by the police, and privacy implications. In the future, we hope to have a more fulsome discussion on this topic and perhaps advance a policy. Finally, we talked about the OPS response to COVID-19, our strategic planning for the next cycle, and an internal communications protocol that is before the board this evening for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Valiquet. And the Finance and Audit Committee meetings and Human Resources Committee meetings, number 7 of 4th of March. As chair of both HR and FAC, I will provide the next 2 updates. The HR committee met in camera on the 4th of March to discuss 3 items, namely a legal matter, personnel matter, and organizational restructuring. The Finance and Audit Committee met just last week on the 21st of April to discuss the financial impact of the pandemic on the OPS budget. Like the city, the police is facing an increased budget pressures as this pandemic persists, and we will be having ongoing discussions on solutions to address them. So that the Ottawa Police Services Board received these reports for information. Are these items received?
Received.
Received.
Okay, any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll go on to the next item, which is inquiries. Are there any inquiries?
Yes, Chair, I have.
Okay, member.
And I have 3 inquiries to the Chief. Chief, there has been a great deal of concern expressed about a flawed public alerting system throughout this incident and the RCMP's reliance on Twitter. I am not suggesting the RCMP did anything wrong. I am confident that we will have a better sense of the decisions made and their appropriateness in due time. Having said that, public alerts are critical to keep residents safe during an emergency. So Chief, are you able to comment generally on the communication systems and channels we can expect the OPS to consider, if not use, should a serious public safety emergency occur in Ottawa?
Chief? Did you
Sure,
want to
thank you.
respond to that one?
I'll do my best. Chair, thank you for, through you to Member Daljeet Nerman. You can be assured, Member Nerman, that as these events unfolded in near real time, the command and I had numerous discussions around the implications of the tragedies that unfolded over the last week in Nova Scotia as to how they would affect us here in the nation's capital. There will be a more fulsome review, obviously, as you said, as more details come available. But even in these early days, we have tried to envision how we would handle a similar circumstance here, and in fact, how we've handled other similar circumstances here. We have looked at a range of issues, everything around and including the access that the public might have to uniform equipment of the Ottawa Police Service, through to the mass notification systems that are available to us. While it is too early to respond conclusively, to your question, I will tell you that it is a live discussion and a live review. In fact, Deputy Chief Bell and Superintendent Mark Ford have turned their attention very specifically to the question that you've raised, including seeking out best practice and current practice established by the Solicitor General and the different offices underneath that ministry. I will leave it to Deputy Chief Bell maybe to speak to that later on in his presentation to the board on COVID-19 to date.
Thank you, Chief. My next is, what are the present protocols in place at the OPS for getting rid of old police cruisers? Could they be used or quickly outfitted to resemble a police cruiser?
Thank you again, sir. Just in relation to my previous comments, yes, we're looking at those issues in terms of control of current equipment, used equipment, discarded equipment. There's a full review going on right now through CAO Jeff Letourneau and Superintendent Samir Batnagar. And again, we've made some substantive progress on that, but are not yet prepared to provide a final report and recommendations. Should the board wish so, we can provide that in a future board meeting.
Thank you, Chief. And the last one is, there are suggestions that the precursor to the domestic violence situation. I can tell you that I have been very pleased to see how the OPS is trying to raise awareness about gender-based violence during the pandemic when women are more isolated in the home. But how does the OPS work with organizations and women in Ottawa to prevent gender-based violence? How can the OPS support racialized women who tend to have even less access to service and supports through barriers like culture and language?
Thank you. That's a large and extremely important question. Again, we'll speak to some of that in the presentation from Deputy Chief Bell on our approach to COVID-19 so far and our plans going forward around crime trends, which include women and children and other marginalized persons who are at even greater risk in the current circumstances and foreseeable circumstances until we fully come through the COVID-19 piece. The larger issue of violence against women significantly predates COVID-19 and will be with us well after. There are efforts underway there, but they will be reviewed and stepped up to a greater level. As mentioned earlier on by the chair, we have Joan McKenna, who's in the role of acting deputy chief. And I've asked her to pick up that file, as she already has and has been quite active on it. And again, it's an area that we can make a presentation to the board in the future.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Chair, for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, Member Nerman. Those are obviously very timely and important questions, so thank you for raising them. I'm going to move on to the items of business now, and the first item is the Chief's verbal report. And we'll hold that report for now. The second item is the OPS response to the COVID-19, and there is a presentation, so we'll hold that one as well. The third item is board policy, which is the disclosure of COVID-19 status information. The motion is that the Ottawa Police Services Board approve the disclosure of COVID-19 status information policy as attached as document 1. Is this item approved?
Carried.
Carried?
Yep.
Are there any dissents?
No.
Not hearing any, I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 4, which is the 2019 TELUS Communications Inc. NG 911, which stands for New Generation 911 Contract Amendment. That the Ottawa Police Services Board approve an amendment to the 2019 NG 911 contract with TELUS Communications Inc. for the provisioning and implementation of a backup next generation 911 phone system at a secondary location at a cost of $163,208.50 before tax and associated equipment. Is
Carried.
this item approved?
Carried.
Carried. And are there any dissents?
No, but I have a question. Is it possible to ask it?
Sure, of course.
Okay.
Member Ian?
It's Carol Ann. Just wondering, why wasn't the current and the backup system priced together?
Chief, would you like to pass that on to somebody, or?
I will definitely pass it on to the CAO.
Sure. Thank you. They were priced together. They're just contracted separately, just because they're separate locations.
Okay.
There's
that's
no
fine.
difference in the pricing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So that's approved. There were no dissents. Number 5 is the board committee appointments. The executive director's report is that the Ottawa Police Services Board approved the appointment of Bar Sueta to the Policy and Governance Committee, Complaints Committee, and the Community Awards Selection Committee. Is this item approved?
Carried.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to the next one, which is item number 6, Internal Board Communications Protocol. That the Ottawa Police Services Board approve the Internal Board Communications Protocol as endorsed by the Policy and Governance Committee. Is this
Carried.
item approved?
Carried.
Thank you. Any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to the next one, which is item 7, Ontario Association of Police Service Boards sponsorship of virtual annual general meeting. That the Ottawa Police Services Board approve a sponsorship of $1,500 for the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards annual general meeting to be held virtually May 29th, 2020. Is this item approved?
Carried.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any.
Sandy,
Yes.
this is Robert Sueta. I
Yes.
got a quick question on this point. Is this a general practice that the Ottawa Police Service Board does, where they sponsor different events?
Well, these actually, this is the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards is an organization we are a member of 2 organizations. One is the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards, which is a collection of police service boards like ourselves right across the province. And we work collectively on issues of mutual concern. So when we have a difficulty, for instance, Krista will reach out to the OAPSB, which is the acronym for that, or the CAPG, which is the Canadian Association of Police Governance. And what we get from them is the ability to understand, because all of the boards, not only in Ontario, but right across Canada, face similar challenges. And so through our membership of these, for instance, through our CAPG membership, the Canadian organization, we have monthly seminars that give us information that is essential as part of our training. So we are a member of these 2 because they are specifically related to our day-to-day work and enable us to carry out. And one of the critical functions, as I was mentioning, is the ability to give us advice and evidence when we're looking at how we deal with a particular challenge that we face.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, are there any dissents on this? Not hearing any, I'll move on to number 8, which is the Ottawa Police Service response to the motion on measures to curb gun violence. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. And I just wanted to thank the OPS staff for their work on this report and pulling together this valuable information. I know the issue of gun violence is top of mind for our entire community. And I think this report will be helpful in informing the community safety and well-being plan, as well as the overall community response required to make progress on stemming this type of violence. I would move that this report be forwarded by the Executive Director to City Council for information, coupled with a presentation by the OPS. Chief, did you want to add anything further to this?
Well, Chair, thank you. I'll echo your comments. The contents of the report not only represent input from a wide variety of OPS members and leaders at every rank and across the organization, but they represent a body of work that the OPS has partnered with other important organizations like Crime Prevention Ottawa, as well as our direct support to development of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan here in the nation's capital. I will say that at the heart of this is in fact the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. We have been blessed with new legislation that significantly advances the Police Services Act and thereby the operating model and operational requirements of every police service in Ontario, as well as the responsibilities and accountabilities of every municipality and regional municipality in Ontario to develop not just a safety plan, but a well-being and a health plan. And quite frankly, coming out of COVID-19, which we'll touch on later on, this is a groundbreaking opportunity for us to move from a policing model to a whole of city and whole of society model approach to building resilience at the individual, neighborhood, city and societal level. We can tackle gun violence by arresting people who are engaged in gun and gang and drug related criminal activity and really just tackle the symptoms of the problem. Or we can approach it in a much more preventative and holistic way through the community safety and well-being approach. And we can actually get to the roots as well as the fruits of this particular issue. Last but not least, I will say that the work that we've done here in the Ottawa Police Service, through the encouragement and leadership of the board's strategic priorities to reinvest in community policing, specifically our investments in neighborhood policing, are at the heart of what's in this report. The reintroduction of neighborhood policing in a new version in the fall of last year, the commitment to double the amount of neighborhoods where neighborhood officers are deployed to, and the overall approach to neighborhood policing in support of, in alignment with, and in partnership with not-for-profit agencies in the city itself, are at the heart of our approach to addressing Councillor King's motion. I also want to specifically thank Councillor King for the courage and the articulate way in which he approached that motion. It has stimulated a healthy amount of discourse, not just within the police service, but between the service and the board and within our partners as well. And we're very much looking forward to the opportunity of presenting in a more fulsome way this plan to the city at some point down the road.
Thank you very much, Chief. I think that's a really important point you're making about the more holistic approach and the community safety and well-being plan. And I hope it doesn't get deferred as there's been some suggestion it might be, because I completely agree with you. This is an important step for us to take. Is this report received?
Received.
Does the board approve of having the report forwarded to City Council for information?
Yes.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 9, the sworn promotion process 2019 annual report. That the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Chair, I have a small question on that, if I may.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Chair, in my inquiry about this, especially this promotion process in February, one of the questions I raised was, and I quote, during the promotion process in OPS, giving regards to have adequate representation of females, members of the LGBTQ, visible minorities, and what steps are being initiated to fill the gaps in different levels at OPS. And the response I got, and I quote, the OPS does not collect gender diversity information from candidates as part of the application for any of our promotional processes. However, a fulsome review of all human resources policies will be taken place in 2020 with EDI lens. So my question is, when in 2020, now given this pandemic issues, do we expect something on these policies in 2020, or it may pass in 2021?
Chief, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you. It's an important issue, Member Nerman, and remains a critical priority for us. We actually have had this discussion internally as well as between the service and the board. COVID-19 represents an unprecedented challenge in so many ways. Again, we're going to hear much more about that from Deputy Chief Bell. But it cannot and must not derail the priorities that have been set for this organization by the board through your consultation process with the broader community and with the broader membership. We have to remain laser focused on those priorities because they will exist after COVID-19 moves on. In fact, in many cases, they will be even more of a priority for us. Now, the reality is a significant amount of our resources have had to be redirected to dealing with the initial major spike in the response, and they will still be significantly consumed over the next several months. But our commitment remains. We will form an EDI unit that will implement the EDI action plan, and we will revisit the priorities of that plan to be accomplished this year, only to see whether or not we can accomplish the full set of goals articulated, and whether or not we need to defer some into next year. But our intent is to keep as many of those priorities as possible and deliver within the year. But we are challenged, and you'll hear more about those challenges very shortly in the presentation from DC Bell. They remain a priority, and we expect that the board will hold us to account and the broader public will hold us to account to deliver on those priorities.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Nurin. Thank you, Chief. So that is received, and there are no dissents on that, item 9. Item 10, Workplace Injuries, Illness and Accidents 2019 Annual Report. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this
Received.
item received?
Yep.
Is there any dissent on that? Not hearing any. I'll move on to the next one, which is item 11, the complaints report. Part 5, Police Services Act, first quarter 2020, that the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to the next one, which is the Financial Status Report, 2019 Annual Report. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to item 13, which is response to inquiry, OPS investigation of OIPRD complaint. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I will move on to the next item, which I have to change over my notes for. Response to inquiry, tactical dynamic entry. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to item 15, which is response to inquiry, facial recognition software. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. I might note, as mentioned by Member Valiquet, the board will be looking to have more broader discussions with respect to the use of technology by the OPS and privacy implications. This inquiry response will help form those discussions. Is this item received?
Received.
Is there any dissent? Not hearing any, I'll move on to the next one, which is a report on an SIU investigation. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to item 17, which is the board monitoring requirements for the first quarter of 2020. That the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Thank you. Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I'll move on to item 18, which is outstanding board inquiries and motions, April 2020. That the Ottawa Police Services Board receive this report for information. Is this received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I will move on to letters of commendation. That the Ottawa Police Services Board receive this report for information. Is this item received?
Received.
Are there any dissents? Not hearing any, I will move on to the held items. The first one we're going to go to will be item 1, the Chief's verbal report. Chief?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Board. I apologize in advance. This will be a longer verbal report than ones in the past, maybe the longest one yet. The rationale will become apparent as we move through the various areas I want to cover. First of all, I want to acknowledge this is my first time in 3 decades in policing to be involved in a virtual board meeting. And my compliments to the chair, the board, the executive director for your ability to innovate and also keep engaged the broader public on an important area of police oversight. I think it's incumbent on all of us to leverage technology and to be innovative and adaptable in regards to the present challenges of the pandemic, and quite frankly, to consider very, very different ways of our operations even after the pandemic. I also, Chair, want to join you in welcoming our new board member, Mr. Robert Sueda, to the board. I've heard very, very strong and complimentary things about the new board member, and I look forward to him asking tough questions and raising our performance to an even greater level. So a lot has changed since our last board meeting in February. This has been a very difficult time for everyone in the country, quite frankly, everyone around the world. I'm extremely proud of the work, the innovation, the creativity, the compassionate exercise of duty and personal compassion and caring that I've seen from our membership in every rank and every role. circumstances internal that will be away from the line of sight from the public, and in very public expressions of that level of professionalism and compassion. It would be remiss of me to take away from what I know will be an outstanding presentation by Deputy Chief Bell, who will follow shortly with a COVID report. But I will tell you, despite unprecedented circumstances, the members of this organization have risen to the challenge, keeping each other safe and keeping our community safe. There have been incredible acts of innovation, some of which have been copied around the province and around the country. And we have also been humble enough to realize we don't have all the answers or all the solutions. And we've been diligent in looking around the world and across the horizon for best or emerging best practices and applied them here in a customized way. We're extremely grateful for the cooperation, collaboration, and sometimes healthy challenges by the board, the Ottawa Police Association, and the Senior Officer Association. Ultimately, we have helped each other to do the best job possible for our members so they can do the best job possible for the community. I want to talk now about the tragic events that unfolded the previous Sunday in Nova Scotia. Our thoughts and prayers continue to be with the victims, all of the victims of this incredible Canadian tragedy. We also hold up specially RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson and her family. Heidi, as we have found out in recent days, took a course of action in her last moments of life that may have saved numerous other lives, and in the course of which she lost her own life. Every one of the people that died the victims in that horrendous homicide were heroes in their own ways, and we'll never fully know all of what they did in the course of their lives or in the final moments. And we reach out to them with thought and prayer to their families. Every day our officers go to work to keep communities safe. Shootings such as this are a grim reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of an effective, progressive police service to manage the risks that society faces and to put our officers in the best position to prevent and intervene and to go home safely to their families. In the unfolding hours on Sunday, I reached out to Commissioner Brenda Lucky. To her credit, she answered the phone and spoke very quickly to me. I offered her condolences and practical supports as we could. Over the next several days, our members did their very best to honor all the victims of that shooting, as well as the members of the RCMP who were struggling even at that time to understand and respond fully to the unfolding tragic events. Some of the efforts were shared on digital platforms, particularly 2 videos that were put out. We're grateful that they reached many of the members of the RCMP and helped to raise their spirits. We've had significant responses from the RCMP as well as other members of the community in Nova Scotia and from the public around the world in regards to this. One letter that I just share very quickly from a member of the RCMP. I just watched a video of Platoon C roll call for April 21st, 2020 in memory of RCMP Constable Stevenson, recently murdered in the line of duty in Nova Scotia. I've never witnessed a more moving tribute to a fallen comrade. As a retired RCMP member myself, thank you for your support. Carry on and be very, very careful out there. I can tell you I have received numerous other correspondence, phone calls, letters, social media posts for officers and members of the Ottawa Police Service for their response to the COVID-19, to the tragic incidents that took place in Nova Scotia, and to the day-to-day work of policing in the nation's capital, some of which are reflected in the board item that relates to letters received, but the vast majority of which can never be reflected fully in any such venue as this. Despite all the challenges, we're moving forward with advancing leadership in this organization. I'm very pleased to announce the promotion of new inspectors, Frank Daou, Debbie Palmer, Dana Reynolds, and Kevin Maloney. At some point, when we're able to gather in a physical space, I would like to introduce these new inspectors formally to the board. They're outstanding individuals with decades of dedicated service to keeping this city safe and serving at the highest order. They're an outstanding group of leaders, very different in their approach, very different in their backgrounds, but all very committed to advancing the priorities of the board and advancing a progressive and equitable and inclusive police service. I'm also pleased to announce the promotion of Mark Patterson to the rank of superintendent. Mark had been in the acting role for a number of months, and he's presented to this board on several occasions on board's priorities. We've promoted him and left him in place to continue to drive to a record year of hiring of members into the Ottawa Police Service, and I'll be glad to report on some of the advancements that Mark and his HR team have actually accomplished to date. As you're aware, we have a new sworn recruiting process that we launched in January 2020, and it's already having great results. We've already had 721 candidates apply for a career with the Ottawa Police Service as a police officer year to date in 2020. That's up from our yearly average of 650 this time. The quality of candidates is very strong. Post-secondary education, multiple languages. They've worked in IT, in the military, in other walks of life where they will bring needed skills and experiences and lived experience into the organization. It includes an increasingly strong pool of diversity within our applicant pool. Currently, there are 19% of our applicants who are female, 36% who are visible minority, 4% who self-identify as Indigenous, and 8% who identify as LGBTQS. This is compared to a historical average of only 12% female and 13% visible minority. We'll continue to work on the hiring process to improve the quality, the quantity, and the diversity of our applicant pool. But clearly the work being done to date by our outreach teams, our recruiting team, and our HR team is having excellent results. We look forward to bringing these outstanding individuals formally into the organization, training them and deploying them as quickly as possible. I also want to recognize the selection and appointment of my new executive officer. I'm pleased to announce Inspector Pat Flanagan is now in the role of executive officer. I want to extend my appreciation and thanks to Superintendent Jamie Dunlop, who held that role and is now taking his considerable skills, experience, and passion to lead our community policing efforts within Frontline Directorate under DC Bell. Many of you know Pat Flanagan, but for those of you less familiar, he has a long history with the Ottawa Police Service, over 3 decades of service. Equally importantly, he comes from a family that's dedicated their working lives to serving and protecting the city. And in fact, Pat's father was a former chief of police here. Pat brings to us the qualities that made his father a great police chief. He understands quality leadership and has delivered that throughout his career. He understands the importance of our frontline members, and he understands that diversity is our strength. And while we have to struggle sometimes to advance that, it is at the core of who we are in the nation's capital and what this nation stands for. That's the first half of my presentation, Chair, and now I'll transition to the second half. And it is a tale of 2 halves, unfortunately, because the second half of this will outline some of the larger challenges that we're facing in the organization. Last Thursday was the culmination of a 10-month investigation by the RCMP Anti-Corruption Unit. I spoke about this last week, but for those of you again that need a more clear reminder, prior to my arrival here as chief, the Ottawa Police Service became aware of the corrupt practice of one of its members. The command of the day took the right step. They identified it as a significant risk to the reputation of this organization and to our ability to deliver policing. They reached out to the RCMP and asked them to conduct a full and independent investigation into this member's activities. Over the next 10 months, the RCMP concluded that there were 2 other members involved in corrupt practice. All 3 members were arrested on Thursday morning last week. They were all charged with criminal offenses relating to corrupt practice, and later in the day, all 3 suspended. I was informed of this investigation on the day that I was sworn in. I concurred with the course of action that had been taken and supported it and received updates from our professional standards investigators who were working in support of the overall RCMP investigation. I want to be clear, the behavior alleged here needs to be proven through due process in a court of law, but the behavior that is alleged would be unacceptable and not aligned at all to our core values and the integrity of our members. Nobody is above the law and nobody is below the law, and we must be respectful of the judicial process that is underway. The investigation is ongoing. The RCMP remains as the lead investigative body for this matter and will support whatever judicial process takes place. While that is going on, we are taking steps to remediate and move forward as an organization. I'll touch on those later. The next area that I want to talk about is the issue of workplace harassment and workplace violence, in particular sexual harassment and sexual violence in the workplace. We can have no tolerance for this type of activity, but unfortunately it remains part of the institution of policing, and it remains part of what we are facing within this organization. We need to do better. We need to do more. As I mentioned earlier on, I've assigned Acting Deputy Chief Joan McKenna to the file broadly of violence against women. But I've also asked her to represent the service's interest in a joint board and service initiative to specifically address workplace harassment, workplace violence, as it impacts primarily on women within our organization. This process will have support from external advisory groups and subject matter experts. And again, Joan is in the process of working with the executive director of the board, as well as board members, to pull together the right internal and external members to advance this very important, critically important initiative between the board and the service. We will have more information on the framework, the timelines, the priorities. We, in the interim, encourage others who may be facing workplace harassment and workplace violence to come forward. They will have my full support, our command's full support, the organization's full support, and the board's full support. The next thing I need to advise the board is a matter that was literally unfolding over the last 24 hours. It is a disgusting racist meme that has been circulating inside the Ottawa Police Service and is now circulating in the community. It targets a number of our racialized members within the service. This is an overt act of racism and it is unacceptable. It is more evidence of the need for a serious overhaul of our culture of ethics and ethical behavior. The culture of the Ottawa Police Service needs significant improvement. We can no longer ignore this reality. This morning I met with the executive command and I launched a chief's complaint into this matter. We'll be looking at the distribution and the sharing of this material and ultimately looking for attribution as to the individual or individuals who created this, who brought this into the organization, and who have circulated it and who have harmed many inside the organization and many more outside of the organization. Our senior leadership team met in an emergency meeting this morning. We all own this and we have a responsibility to show leadership on this issue. We'll be talking to the membership directly through a series of communications which will happen later on. We're listening to our members and to our community who have also received this meme, and we know the concerns that are circulating both inside and outside of our service. We've reached out to the affected members as well as to their colleagues and to their families. We're reaching out to our community, particularly through our Community Equity Council. This behavior is unacceptable, and we will do our best to address this issue and advance the Ottawa Police Service culture. Bullying, bias, discrimination, racism, workplace violence, workplace harassment, corrupt practice, criminal corrupt practice have no place in policing. But unfortunately, they remain part of the history of policing in this country and in this city. And we must do everything we can collectively, whether within the organization, at the board level, and beyond across the city of a million souls. We are challenged by unique and unprecedented operational issues like COVID-19. It requires us to take a different view of public safety, one that puts public health at the forefront. And because of the issues of police culture, corrupt practice, bullying and bias and discrimination and racism and misogyny, and other issues of isms that have affected policing, we need to look at it beyond a punitive approach, but a healthy approach, healthier individuals coming into the organization, healthier existence within the organization, healthier contributions to the core mission of this organization. The responsibility for every member of the Ottawa Police Service is that we turn these crises into opportunities for needed change. That is my responsibility of Chief of Police of the Ottawa Police Service, and I take that responsibility personally and professionally to heart. There'll be more to say on this, but I will say for now, we are advancing with the creation of a new directorate, specifically focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion, on respect, ethics, and values. It'll be headed up by a superintendent that reports directly to the Office of the Chief of Police and supports every command officer and the CAO in advancing the service's priorities and the board's priorities. The creation of two positions whose primary focus is to build morale, raise esprit de corps, and address the issue of professionalism ethics within our frontline members, the Staff Sergeant Major and the Corps Sergeant Major. The directorate that creates the new units of EDI and respect, ethics, and values will be staffed fully and resourced fully within the coming few weeks. It will take on the EDI action plan and it will take on these major initiatives to address the issue of workplace violence, workplace harassment, corrupt practice, and racist behavior within the organization. This will remain a priority for the organization under my tenure, as it has been a priority going forward as it will be a priority going forward. I repeat again, despite these challenges, I have every faith and confidence in the men and women of the Ottawa Police Service and the leadership of the Ottawa Police Service to overcome these challenges. They are significant setbacks. But I have every confidence through collective action, collective leadership, and to work with our board, our associations, stakeholders in the community, experts in the community, we can and will move forward. I'll conclude there. I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Thank you thank you very much, Chief. And I think, as you know, as we've discussed, there's still much more work to be done, but you certainly have the board's full support, and we certainly look forward to seeing progress in this matter. I'll turn it over to board members now. Are there any members who have questions they would like to ask of the Chief's report?
Yes, Chair, I may.
Okay, Member Nerman.
After Deljet.
Thank you, Chair. Chief, thank you for your wholesome picture. It was quite detailed, and I thank you for all the services with the OPS is doing. I have just a quick follow-up on your second half of the report. Ottawa Citizen reported that there is only one agency presently on the panel of OPS for towing vehicles involved in the accident or impounded by the police. What are your thoughts if this policy is re-examined to have more players for this service to eradicate any chances of corruption and have a level playing field?
Thank you, Member Nerman. I want to be clear, the issue of corrupt practice within policing is for the police service and the institution of policing to fully own and fully deal with. It can express itself in many, many different ways, and certainly the issue of the police relationship to the towing industry, whether here in Ottawa, in my former employee within the City of Toronto, and in other police agencies that I'm well aware of. This is an issue that, for whatever reason, has been one of the fruits of the root of the problem of corrupt practice. To answer your specific question, I think it would be very incumbent on the Ottawa Police Service, the board, and the city to focus its attention on addressing the issue of the towing industry here locally. And I believe that work is already well underway, and it is our intention to support that work. But again, I come back, the issue of corrupt practice goes well beyond the relationship between the local police service and the local towing industry. And we are going to address that issue significantly.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
It's Carol Ann.
Yeah, sorry, Caroline. I just realized I was muted. Thanks very much, Member Nerman. Caroline, you had a question?
Well, I guess I just have a follow-up question to what the chief just said. Corruption is deeper in the Ottawa Police Service than just the towing industry. How serious should we be looking at this, Chief?
Again, I just want to be clear. The investigation that was brought to a conclusion, well, I should say brought to a conclusion, but was brought to a significant step in terms of the arrest is in relation to the tow industry. The broader issue of professional ethics to prevent in the first instance, mitigate in the second, and unfortunately sometimes to respond to, is alive. We have no other ongoing corrupt practice investigations, but we have no doubt that that issue will remain alive, and therefore we have to be as proactive and as committed as possible to preventing it from coming into the organization, identifying it when it is inside, and responding as quickly and as effectively as possible. So that issue will be ongoing and will remain a priority.
Okay, so I'll get to what was my initial question. I just want, can you just explain a little bit more about this new directorate? And I'm not aware that we've ever had a directorate that would deal specifically, with EDI and some of the problems. And can you explain the chief's complaint? I just need to understand these issues a little bit more clearly. The chief's complaint against who or what?
So there's a chief's complaint that relates to the meme that has been circulating. That means we're conducting an active professional standards investigation into the origin of that meme, whether or not any members were involved in creating it, to what extent members were involved in sharing it, and to what extent there are systemic issues that allowed for that to become such a significant issue.
Is it
So
not,
that is a nature.
wouldn't it be easy to determine who created it?
None of that is particularly easy.
No?
These investigations are very difficult. They require us to be able to not only, ultimately it's an attribution issue. So there will be some ability for us to figure out who was sharing it. That is limited to a degree if that is involving internal business systems, but it is even more limited if it involves external digital platforms. It is like any cyber-related investigation. Figuring out what the content is not the challenge. Figuring out who created it, who shared it, and in what circumstances, that's the more challenging piece. So there is a strong and full investigation into this matter, and we will take it as far as we can.
How did you become aware of it?
Members started to receive it, and it was shared, and members reported it up the various chains of command, in some cases directly to me in the last 24 hours. And we have called an emergency session of the command and the executive this morning. We've had a series of responses, including the chief's complaint, over the course of the day, which includes today the notification of the board in the public forum.
So does the media have this yet?
I suspect they will, because there's no doubt media who are listening to this public broadcast.
And you call this a significant setback?
It is a significant setback.
Thank you, Chief. So
Thank you.
just let me finish up. So have we ever seen in the Ottawa Police a specific directorate to deal with this kind of issue? I'm not aware of that. I'm just wondering, anybody?
There have been, I will say again, the Ottawa Police Service has been one of the leading police agencies to accept these challenges at the core of its culture, at the core of the institution, and have done things that no other police agency, in some cases, few others in many cases, have done. I am not aware of a single directorate that combines the full breadth of what we're talking about: equity, diversity, inclusion, respect, ethics, and values, at the level of the office of the chief, staffed to the level that we intend to staff, and given the breadth of mandate and the priority of course of action. Ottawa Police Service, within its history, within its recent history, have set the benchmark, I would suggest, in attempting to address these issues. They were one of the first police agencies, if not the first, to attempt to take a census within the organization to understand the impact of such activities on various demographic groups. They have led the way in terms of recruiting and hiring, the outcomes of which I presented earlier on in my report. They have created positions and hired experts into the organization, people like David Snoddy, who have come in and significantly advanced through their lived experience and their professional expertise the issue of ethics, diversity, and inclusion. We have brought in subject matter experts like Deb Arnaud at the director level and created the Office of Respect, Conduct, and Values. What we're doing is taking up to a whole new level, centralizing those resources, expanding those resources, and attaching them directly to my office and to the command officers so that it can have the weight of the full command team to move down into the organization and through the organization out into the community. I believe that combination of efforts, that level of resourcing, is a first in the Ottawa Police history.
Okay. Just given the work that's been done, it makes it all the more difficult to understand how this could happen. But once we determine who is responsible for this, what is the possible penalty?
Well, we may not actually determine, but the investigation will take it as far. I don't suspect that any amount of penalty will actually address the larger cultural issues, but we will consider the full range of penalties depending on where the investigation takes us.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Are there any other questions from any of the other board members?
Yes, Sadi, Chair.
Yes,
Chair,
Robert.
Chief, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'm just curious, has there been, to your knowledge, previous incidents like this during your watch, or are you aware of anything before your watch of something similar to this?
I want to be clear, sir. Thank you very much for the question, but I do want to be clear. I am the chief of the Ottawa Police Service, and the buck stops here in this office. I will not be particularly concerned one way or the other what took place before October 28th. I am very concerned that as I took office on October 28th, this became my responsibility to lead the organization and to lead a team of leaders in this organization to address these issues. I am aware that there are similar incidents that have taken place around this meme. I am aware that there are similar incidents that took place around corrupt practice, including criminal corrupt practice. And I am aware that there were previous incidents around workplace violence and workplace harassment. These are issues that plague policing across this country. And they have plagued this organization. And I am committed to, as I took office on October 28th, 2019, to do everything I can in the time that I am the chief of this police organization to move us forward. I also understood that when I took on that responsibility, there were days that we would move backwards before we could move forwards. And this is one of those days, but we will move forwards.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from any other board members?
Actually, could I just ask one follow-up question?
Of course.
Are we expecting fallout from the, if it's, I don't know who is the target of this meme, but are we expecting fallout from the community? Like, what is this going to do to community relations again?
It is a setback for the community confidence in the Ottawa Police Service.
Any particular
suspect,
that will feel particularly targeted?
Yeah, predominantly, this is a target of our racialized members. This is a target of our racialized members. And therefore, it will be felt by our racialized members. It will be felt by all of our members. It will be felt predominantly by our racialized communities. It should be felt by all communities that live, work, and play in the city of Ottawa.
So we're talking about our Black community. Okay, that's really sad. Thank you, though, Chief. Okay.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Since there appear to be no other questions, I would ask that the Ottawa Police Services Board receive this report for information. Is it received?
Received.
Anybody opposed to that? Not hearing any. I will then go on to item number 2, which is the OPS response to COVID-19. I believe there's a presentation for this.
Yes, there is, Mr. Chair. So thank you very much. I'll just pull the presentation up. Hopefully I'm technologically savvy enough. There, we should have that now. Are we up there?
Looks good to me.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you very much. So thank you, board, for having and inviting us to provide you a little bit of context and background in terms of what we've been doing for the last 8 to 9 to 10 weeks as we've started to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the fallout and outcome of that within our own organization. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you an overview of exactly where we've come from, what we're doing now in the response phase, and how we're going to move ahead over the days, weeks, and months to come to deal with the situation that we're in. We thank the board for their participation on an almost daily basis at some point to get information from us and provide us input and perspective in terms of some of the issues that are challenging us, and just get information so that they can share it with their constituents and the people that they're representing. So as everyone knows, in late of last year, December of last year, the COVID-19 started to emerge. It slowly at the beginning progressed across China, then progressed across Europe and around the world. As we saw this pandemic start to develop, what we did is in early January, we pulled out our pandemic planning. We are fortunate in Ottawa to work with many partners within the city to actually look at the type of comprehensive response that we would have to a pandemic situation. We've had a couple incidents, whether it's SARS or H1N1, where the need for pandemic planning has been in place. So we knew that we had a good basis and a good starting ground for us to move ahead if we got to the point where we did need to roll into pandemic planning and pandemic response. In late March, pandemic was declared. And at that point, we took an incident management system approach to actually how the Ottawa Police would respond as an employer and as a service provider within the city. All the way through, we've reiterated, and I don't think you could ever understate it, this is a public health incident. This is an incident that's led by Ottawa Public Health within the City of Ottawa and helped to be coordinated through the Emergency Operations Center within the City of Ottawa. We're a strong partner with those groups, and we've provided contribution in the areas that are our responsibility, but always realizing that this is a public health-led incident, and all of our responses should be appropriate around that. So in our pandemic planning, what we did early on was we struck up a team. And once a pandemic was declared, we went from the planning phase into the actual and operational phase, where this team came in and started to implement all of the issues and responses to the things that we were seeing emerge. One thing that we saw early on is that this is an all-of-service effort. We had a strong core team that was out doing planning, doing implementation of the responses that I'm going to get to later on in the presentation, but we had extremely good cooperation right across the service in what our response was. And that allowed us to actually have a good, progressive, comprehensive response that has allowed so far for some of the results that we've seen. The other thing that we did early on was we really doubled down on our external partnerships. We had the EOC and all of our city partners, but we also went to look provincially, nationally, and internationally around how other people were responding or what other policing services had seen as response options or response gaps in how they had individually dealt with the pandemic as it came into their services and in their city. What that provided us, seeing as Canada was late to enter into the pandemic state, it gave us a lot of information to draw on. It gave us a lot of information to look at what are some of the better practices that we knew would work, what are some of the things to avoid that we knew would create challenges. So as we moved ahead, and in the early days, we knew that we needed to identify a really good, consistent operational approach. So we set out 4 principles within our operational approach, commonly known in incident management as a commander's intent. So we identified that our first priority was to continue to provide the policing operations that we needed to. On a daily basis, we need to be available 24/7 to respond to crime and and social disorder issues, work in communities to continue to make them safe, well communities to live and run businesses in, as well as make sure that we continue to work with our city partners to deliver community safety. The second thing that we identified was that because of the nature of this virus, it's going to be extremely important that we protect the health and well-being of our membership. We'll get into some of the steps we took in order to deal with that specific issue. We knew we needed to maintain the capacity to deliver policing operations. So that means we knew that at any point, if our service was to be struck with pandemic or a number of people affected by the virus internally, we had to set up strategies and systems that allowed people to be able to come in and do our frontline work and do the support work that we need to deliver those frontline operations. And we knew finally that we needed to continue to protect our community and healthcare system. That if we weren't a responsible employer, we weren't a responsible member of the community and had a large number of members who were affected by this, that we could contribute to what could be an overwhelming of the healthcare system. So those were the issues that we identified very early on of areas that we needed to prioritize. And as work packages came in and as issues were identified, we used that system to actually prioritize what we were addressing and how we were doing it. As we approached the work that we needed to undertake, because if you remember 5-6 weeks ago, it was a dramatically changing environment. It seemed that we were getting information in and new streams of challenges and need for response almost on an hourly basis, definitely on a daily basis. So early on, we adopted the infectious disease hierarchy of controls that would give us an ability to actually start to plan, prepare how we would meet that operational approach that we were doing. It allowed us to create a systematic approach in terms of how we were looking to respond to issues both internally and externally. And based on that hierarchy of infectious disease hierarchy of controls, we put a number of strategies in place to help to address and make sure that we were continuing to keep our members safe, keep them healthy, and be able to deliver our policing operations. Some of those included early on, we created a work from home strategy that allowed anybody that had the ability to work from home to do that. That was a challenging package of work for us because traditionally we hadn't had many people that worked from home. But I can tell you we had, like I said, it was an all of service effort. We had people that stepped up to the plate to help us right away to develop and deliver those systems, whether it be BIS to create the technological base for it or human resources to create some sort of playbook on how managers who typically had managed within an office would now work with their staff from home. We also went to virtual parades and virtual meetings. We eliminated almost wholly early on the need for face-to-face contact. You're seeing today some of the outcomes of that as we do our first Zoom board meeting. Another area that we identified early on was what we called a reserved staffing model. As we talked to many different police services around the world who were hit hard by this virus, they all identified that had they been able to take a pocket or a group of people early on and set them at home so that they would be ready and capable of coming in if there was large numbers of people affected, that would be a good strategy to deal with issues. We were one of the early services across the province and across the country who actually developed and implemented this system. And you still at this point have differing police services going to that system now. We also looked at physical things we could do within our environment, like creating barriers between people. So one example I can give you that is in our interview rooms, there is now a plexiglass barrier between the person who would be the interviewee and the interviewer to create some safety in that environment. We spent a great deal of time focusing on our personal protective equipment as well. We're very fortunate in Ottawa that all of our frontline members were issued a gas mask as part of our regular operational deployment. That we know is the best level of protection that you can provide the members on the front line because it absolutely protects them from this virus. Early on, we identified that had some challenges from an operational perspective. It was difficult to wear. It wasn't something that was meant to be donned for long periods of time in a continuous operational environment. So we were able to procure and bring in half mask visors that should be arriving this week and distributed to our members. Beyond that, we knew we had a stock of N95 masks. They were issued to our frontline civilian staff for them to wear and utilize. And we had surgical masks that were given broadly across the organization for people to have protection when they went into whatever sort of scenario they felt that they needed that level of protection. The other area that I want to focus on in terms of the responses around our decontamination strategies. We did a lot of work in identifying effective and efficient decontamination strategies and brought those very early out to our front line. That was things as simple as instructing officers on how to decontaminate their cruiser on a daily basis, how to decontaminate the equipment they have, to the broader scale when we have somebody who's actually has come into contact with someone with COVID-19, how we do a full decontamination on them and all of their equipment to make sure that they are absolutely rid of any sort of infection or exposure to the disease. So those are some of the things that we started early on in order to be responsive to the issues we were seeing. Each one of those was a very large package of work and something that really diverted from the way that we had traditionally delivered policing services here. The other thing that we identified very early on was this was a very difficult and challenging communications battle within the organization. And by that, what I mean is there was so much information coming in. Legislation was being introduced on a daily basis. There was new protocols and directives whether from public health, Ontario Public Health, from the city, from the federal government, all over the place. We were getting directives and change of information that directly affected how our officers provided their frontline policing services. What we were able to do early on was take that huge amount of information and really quickly distill down effective methods to get it out. I want to take a minute to thank our corporate communications, our BIS, for all of the work that they did to make sure that all this information was accessible, that we had a place to store it, and that officers and civilian members could find it at a moment's notice almost immediately so that they would know the information that they were dealing with. The other thing that we did early on was we established what we called information navigators. When we had this volume of information that our members needed to know and be able to access, it was difficult and challenging to find. So with some of the work at home strategies, we were able to identify people that would actually help officers and civilian members as they had questions, navigate the system to find what their responses were. As we went through this, we quickly identified and reiterated and confirmed something we already knew. There was no better way to get information out to members of this organization no better way than through their chains of command, through their supervisory channels. So about 2 weeks in, we really doubled down on trying to make sure that we had proper communications, proper conduits to have discussions and dialogues with our senior leadership and our managers and staff sergeants groups, so we could ensure that they had the information they needed in their hands so that they could then provide it to their chains of command. We found that all of these different mechanisms created a pretty good environment to allow information to permeate into the organization so that members could do their jobs as they needed to do. We also noted that there was a real change in our external response and our call for service information. The day that we went into pandemic planning mode, we struck up a group of people that were responsible strictly for tracking, managing, and monitoring the calls for service and what we believed were going to be the anticipated changes in those calls for service as we moved through this period. We were right to identify that because what we've seen is over a 30% decrease in the overall calls for service that the organization is taking in. Specifically, we've seen some changes that we needed to be responsive to. One of them we've talked about today was around partner and domestic dispute issues. We saw an increase in those and continue to see an increase in those. And in that, we're making sure that we access community supports, our community partners, and make sure that through all of our avenues and that we get preventative information out around that issue. We've also seen an increase in neighbor disputes. We know that as people are home and located sometimes in a more frustrated state within their home situation, that it's created conflict between neighbors, between people that live in close proximity. We've seen an increase in mental health calls. We've also seen an increase in calls to respond to those in the vulnerable sector, mainly around the homeless population, as they have looked to adapt to the situation. When it comes to crime, we have been really focusing on what is the crime response that we have in our area. What we've seen overall is during the state of emergency, an overall 20% reduction in crimes being committed in the city. What we believe a large contributor to that is the fact that our theft under calls have decreased so dramatically with the closing of businesses that could attribute to a large portion of that decrease in criminal events. The other thing that we've seen is a decrease in our shootings, actually a dramatic decrease in our shootings. Equally as important as that. We want to keep that trend going. We've also seen an increase in the seizures of handguns and long guns by our investigative unit and our frontline members. So that's also another trend that we want to keep going. From a specific, other specific crime events, we've seen increase in break and enters. But coupled with that, we're seeing a modest increase in the solvency of those break and enters. And we see an increase in frauds, specifically and most notably elder frauds. And we're making sure that we track and are responsive to those issues. So now I will turn it over to Jeff Letourneau to give us information on financial updates.
Thank you, Steve. I'm happy to provide a brief financial update to the board. We did last week provide a more detailed financial update to the Finance and Audit Committee. As mentioned previously on the call by the chief, the COVID-19 pandemic response represents a major financial risk for the 2020 OPS budget. The OPS command team is committed and will provide monthly updates to the board through the Finance and Audit Committee. A significant number of financial controls have already been implemented. Some examples: full incident command system with finance position and dedicated cost tracking was implemented in early March. Discretionary spending freeze was implemented in early March as well, along with employee transfer and temporary assignment freezes. Enhanced overtime reporting and controls has been implemented as well, along with the deferral of WSIB administrative fees. The current forecast ranges from a deficit between 1.4 million and 5.9 million, depending on the scenario. Additional options are currently under review to reduce the in-year deficit and manage long-term impacts into 2021 and beyond. And these options will be weighed against the commander's intent, as Deputy Chief Bell identified earlier, with the risks to implement, along with current operating and financial conditions. Moving on to the next slide. This slide represents our current forecast and is aligned with the City of Ottawa's Business Continuity Task Force financial forecasting process. It's important to note that it does include high-level assumptions at this time. The forecast will evolve as more time passes and more data is available. There are currently 2 scenarios included in the forecast, and they're based on the length of the pandemic. The end of June, lasting to the end of June, and lasting to the end of December 2020. The forecast identifies revenue pressures mainly from reduction in paid duties, a reduction in background check volumes, and a significant reduction at the airport. Expense pressures are driven by increased requirements for PPE, a significant increase in unused annual leave, as well as an increase in overtime specifically related to managing the pandemic. Total pressures identified range between 6.5 million and 18.8 million. On the expense savings side, their expense savings are generated through the reduction in court overtime, as well as candidate overtime and regular overtime, along with the reduction in fuel costs. Other expense savings relate to the implementation of the discretionary spending freeze, significant reduction in travel and training, and the reduction in paid duty overtime. Total expense savings largely offset the expense pressures identified, and they range between 5.1 million and 12.9 million. And that leaves a deficit of between 1.4 and 5.9 million. It is important to note that this forecast does not include any revenue pressure from the city. The 2020 budget does include revenue from red light cameras and one-time tax stabilization funding. If those items don't materialize, there is risk the deficit could be higher. The command team is working hard on options to address the deficit, and will keep the board informed through the Finance and Audit Committee. Thanks, Steve. Back over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So that brings us up on where we are right now, our current state, the work we've done to get us to the point that we are today. I'm pleased to let you know that over the period of the pandemic, we've just had 3 incidents. 3 incidents is 3 incidents too many, but we have had 3 members fall ill from COVID-19. And it's resulted in just a small number of people being taken out of the workforce. But we're at a turning point now. So we've had really good response and really good support through legislation to actually flatten the curve. And as you're seeing through provincial and federal responses and information, we believe we've done that. We believe as a society that we've been able to achieve that. So now we go from our incident response where we would be now into a stabilization period. You saw today the province has unveiled a 3-point plan on how they're going to release restrictions within our community and on the economy. The federal government is in the steps of creating the same sort of plan to release some restrictions. That means you'll see people moving within our community more. That means you'll see an increase in the risk of community transmission again, unless we take the proper steps to ensure that we combat that. That's where we are right now. We believe that there needs to be a series of steps that are put in place, both as an Ottawa Police employer and as an Ottawa Police community service provider, to make sure that we don't contribute or have a situation where we have more members who are becoming ill because of some of the steps we've taken that has taken us backwards. We believe that this is going to be a very challenging time for us. We believe it's going to be a very challenging time for our community, but we're still placing the goal that we have 0 workplace transmissions as a result of any of the changing legislation or changing restrictions that are placed in and around our community. So in doing that, we've created a 3-stream approach to look at how we identify, target, plan, implement the changes that need to be made in our organization to harden the states where we need to that we have, or in some situations, bring in new abilities for us to make sure that we have members physical distancing. We have members wearing the right level and right type of PPE at the time. Those 3 streams are around people, service, and finance. So as we are currently engaging our planning team to look at those 3 areas, we will shortly be identifying the plans and then implementing the steps that we need to take to make sure that we stay as healthy as we are now and that we don't deteriorate in that as we move ahead. So I started out by saying this had been an all-of-service event, and I want to reiterate that again. We had really strong people from a planning perspective step up and do an amazing job in terms of identifying how we would move ahead in being responsive to what was a challenging and rapidly emerging situation. But I think it's vitally important that just as much as recognizing that group of people, it's really important that we recognize all of the leadership and all of the membership of this organization who stepped up to a very challenging situation and absolutely responded to the call that was put out to them. From a frontline perspective, we haven't in recent years seen the number of people who are coming in on a regular basis to make sure that they can deliver service to this community. Whether it's finance, HR, BIS, who have supported the changes that rapidly come in, or the leadership team across the organization who have reached out to make sure that their members have the information they have, or make sure that they're supported as they're needed. The wellness teams, the corporate comms teams who have contributed. This, I could go through and name every organization within this organization, every unit, and they have all contributed absolutely to the success that we've seen so far. So with that, I want to provide the board this information. We look forward to providing more information on the next steps on how we move ahead and recognize that this isn't a finished state and we will have to bring more information forward on a regular basis as we progress through this over the next period of time. So thank you, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much, Deputy, and also thank you, Jeff, for the financial update. And I can say as a recipient of your regular updates, you've always been extremely thorough, and I always left the meetings feeling that we had a good fulsome review of what is happening in the city and all that's being done on behalf of the residents. I'm going to turn it over to questions from board members, either for the deputy or for the CAO. Are there any questions?
Sandy, I have a question. It's Suzanne
Yes.
here.
Please go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. Steve, my questions are for you. I just wondered if you could clarify, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly or not. So here goes. Did you say that the high rate of gun seizure, or the higher rate, I guess, of gun seizures at the moment is due to COVID?
No. So what I said was we'd seen a decrease in shootings,
Yeah,
but as on a good, that's a very good news story. On another good news story is we've also seen an increase in the number of handguns and long guns seized, whether it be through frontline interaction or investigations by some of our investigative units. So I don't think we can attribute it to COVID. I don't think there's a correlation there. We haven't studied it, but it was an issue that I thought was important to bring forward to the board because it's a good news story.
yes, and it is indeed, and it's very interesting. My second question is, you must have seen a decrease in motor vehicle collisions and just general traffic woes in general, because there's so far less cars on the road. Is this indeed what is happening?
So I'm going to break it into two pieces. So first, around collisions, we have absolutely seen a decrease in collisions week over week, day over day as we've gone through this, where we used to have on average anywhere from 50 to 70 collisions on a normal day. We may sometimes see under 15 on a day now. So there has absolutely been a decrease there. From a traffic complaint or a traffic issue situation, no, I would say we haven't seen a decrease in that. I think we've seen a decrease in the volume of traffic on the roads, but what we've seen is an increase in some ways of really problematic driving behavior. And
Yes.
that would be specifically around speeding, particularly speeding at excessive speeds that would involve stunt driving. So we've put a real focus and effort and emphasis on doing enforcement and education in that area, because we had seen a number of complaints and we've seen a number of charges related from that.
Yes, I've seen quite a bit on Twitter in this regard. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Are there any other questions for either the chief or our CAO? I'm not hearing any other questions. So on this presentation that the Ottawa Police Services Board received this presentation for information. Is this received?
Received.
Thank you very much. So now we'll go to other business. Are there any other items of business people would like to raise? Not hearing any, so the next would be the consideration of a motion to move in camera. That the Ottawa Police Services Board adjourn the public portion of its meeting to move in camera to discuss confidential items pertaining to legal and personnel matters in accordance with Section 35(4)(b) of the Police Services Act.
Carrie.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, before when we go in camera, we'll be discussing two items: the Public Sector Salary Disclosure Act 2019 and the Labor Relations Unit Report, first quarter 2020. And just before we adjourn, I just wanted to thank Steve and Jeff again. I know how much work you guys have been putting into this, and Jeff, I know from a financial end, this has been a nonstop torrent of figures and issues, and Steve, the same for you. So just wanted to thank you once again for your efforts and during this extremely trying time. So
Thank you very much.
And with that, we'll call for adjournment, and the next meeting will be the regular meeting of Monday, the 25th of May, 2020 at 4 p.m. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be moving to in camera now.
Thank you.
Thank you.